I've been asked about the effect in Canada of the arrival of many newcomers from Russia and Ukraine. I can better say Russian Federation and Ukraine, because it's not just Russia itself from where people have come to Canada. I remember myself the very beginning of that most recent wave of arrival. It began towards the beginning of perestroika in those days, when things were changing at the end of the life of the Soviet Union. There were people in larger numbers still arriving in Canada. There had been people arriving while it was still a more active negative attitude in the Soviet days towards the Orthodox Church, and people did escape to a certain extent. But and they had their influence in North America. Not bad at all, but it was not widespread. The main influence came when it became possible actually to come to Canada without so much trouble. And many of them began to arrive in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver principally. There were not so many in the central part of Canada, the prairie parts that I mean. But in those three main areas, there were larger numbers of people coming. And it was around about the same time that I was having my first experience abroad in Ukraine and in Russia. It was in those days that I first encountered, for instance, in Russia, during my visit with Archbishop Mark to Moscow and to the Optina Monastery and to Holy Trinity St. Sergius Monastery. I also met Patriarch Alexei, whom I had a chance to meet many more times in future years when I was traveling there for meetings on behalf of the Orthodox Church in America. The people who were coming from Russia at that time were coming for various reasons, certainly, but they certainly produced a very beneficial effect on our parishes, because they were coming as not as refugees, but as people who were looking for somehow a more livable life in their own contexts. And because they came to our parishes, they contributed their skills and their understanding and their devotion and their work too in the parish life. They helped the older people and gave encouragement to the older people who were getting very tired by this time. And they were also less limited to using the Russian language out of a desire to preserve it, because they spoke it anyway, and because things were starting to open up, there was not a sense of a need to preserve the Russian language and the Russian way and the Russian faith. I could say the same thing about the Ukrainian language too in Canada, but rather it was possible to maintain it, but also to embrace the local way of life freely. So we had the most, from my experience, the most notable of those early day works was found at Holy Resurrection in Vancouver. There was something similar happening at Christ the Savior in Toronto, but it was not as well defined as it was at Holy Resurrection, and that was care for particular needs in Russia at a time when Russia, after the fall of the Soviet government, was in dire straits economically. People were extremely hungry, and they were destitute. People who were from there, under the leadership of, for instance, Raisa Kolesnikova, were helping to send medicines and clothes and other kinds of needs to people in Russia, in Moscow in particular, and particularly to children's hospitals in the city. It was a very good example, the development of this particular project, the Milosrdia project at Holy Resurrection, for other people to see, because it was the practical application of the Orthodox Christian faith, and visibly so. And it bore a lot of good fruit, and it increased a good contact between people there and in Canada. Until that time, we had been living in Canada and in North America and other places as well, with the aftermath of the revolution in 1917 and the flight of many thousands of people out of the former Russian Empire. And the church abroad was a divided church. You found this in Europe, and you also found it in North America. In North America, we had the still existing remaining work of the original Russian Orthodox mission, which had established a metropolia in North America, and which was reasonably large for North America, and it was very active. But there was also a group of people who did not come to North America with the idea of missionary work, but rather as refugees hoping to go back and to reestablish the empire. And this kind of division continued for many decades, and it caused a lot of tensions. Politics involved in the church's life always make difficulties, and that's why politics don't belong in the church's life. Regardless, the Lord is merciful, and as the recovery of the Russian Orthodox Church was taking place, so came a comprehension not only amongst us in the descendant of the Russian Orthodox mission, now by this time the Orthodox Church in America, but even the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia, which was part of this really strong refugee movement, understood that the church was true, alive, and well over there. People began to visit. They began to see that the church was really the true church. It was the fake. And they began to accept that things were better and hopeful and even safe. And when this began to happen, the relationship between the Russian Orthodox Church, the mother church, and the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia, which was in particular their exile relative, began to work towards reconciliation. And this work towards reconciliation affected us as well the Orthodox Church in America, because families that had been divided between across these lines before now began to be able to be reconciled, and they began to be able to go to each other's churches without having to put on a face of some sort of protest about one thing or another. Peace began to grow, harmony began to be established. And this establishment was really cemented when Patriarch Alexei of blessed memory and Metropolitan Lavre of blessed memory signed the documents of reconciliation at Christ the Savior Cathedral in Moscow in 2007. That was an extremely significant and poignant and glorious moment for the Church's life, when a breakage can be healed like this. And as a result of this, now in North America and in Canada and our own experience here, people are now able to worship together naturally, even though it's still different administrations and different bishops. It feels like the same church now. And it doesn't need so much to be a distinction like this, because we are able to work together to glorify God and support each other and to nurture and spread the Orthodox Christian faith together. Good, the Lord is so merciful with us. He is so merciful with us. How he works with us and overcomes things we could never do by ourselves. But because we are able to cooperate with him, we are able to do, as he says, things are, with human beings, things are not possible, but with God, everything is possible. And it's a glorious and beautiful thing to be able to work together with the Lord in such a way.